Every single character in this book is a vibe. If you're interested in young adult books in general, especially young adult fantasy specifically, this is a good one. It is just like, it's just so good. I just love it so much. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I am recapping everything that I read in November. I read 6 books, which is shocking because I read 3 books at the beginning of the month and then I got so sick I could barely even move, and I didn't read anything for maybe 3 weeks, honestly. And then in the last week of November, I finished another 3 books. I thought that this was gonna be the shortest video ever with 3 sad little books, but I managed to get 6, so I'm super happy. I read this month 4 new books and then 2 were rereads. And as far as the genres, one of them was a Gothic horror thriller kind of historical fiction. One of them was a dark paranormal romance. 2 of them were young adult urban fantasies, and then 2 of them are young adults, but I question that because I don't really think that's a good categorization for this book, but it says young A online. So a young A pirate adventure romantasy kind of book. So it honestly wasn't that varied. It kind of was my usual, which has a little string of fantasy through everything, no matter what. Even the Gothic horror thriller, like there was still a fantastical kind of element to it. I thought that there wouldn't be, but I feel like everything I read is related to fantasy in some way, or at least just like 1 degree separated. But I did really enjoy these books. As per usual, I will be rating them with my CAWPILE rating method. I will put that over here so that you can see what it is. Basically, it's a numbers rating system, and the CAWPILE stands for something different. And then each one of those categories within the word CAWPILE gets their own rating. I will put my numbers rating here. I will link the creator in the description below. Not only does she talk about her rating system, but she also gives a completely free spreadsheet so that you can track everything. And it's automatic, with graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, everything. It's just like the most amazing thing, and it fills my little organizational heart with so much joy. So if you're also like me, I would highly recommend checking out the video and then downloading one of her spreadsheets. I believe she makes a new one every year with updates. And I also, in addition to the CAWPILE rating system, add a kind of spice rating, my own personal spice-o-meter, you could call it, I guess. And this is what that is for me. Basically, it goes from 0, which is absolutely nothing, and 1, which is implied. It's just behind closed doors, as in like the curtain falls, you don't actually see anything, it's just heavily implied or perhaps talked about later on, whatever, all the way up to 5, which is super smutty. It's like a plot point in the book. It happens very frequently and it's very explicit. And honestly, for me, I'm not a smut reader, so my smut-o-meter might be a little bit different than yours. Just keep in mind, I don't really like reading smut that much. I prefer clean romances, or at least like just implied smut. And that is everything that you have to know before we jump in. So I will just get started. The first book that I read this month was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And this is the kind of historical fiction Gothic horror thriller book that I read. And like I said, it does have a fantastical kind of element to it. So it's not like a horror thriller that has 0 fantasy and is very realistic. It is kind of half and half, I would say. Like, it's really not that fantastical, but it's definitely like just a little sprinkling as the book goes on, more and more. And as you can see by my ratings, I didn't rate anything for this book particularly high. There were no 10s, which anyways is kind of rare, but there were also no 9s. In fact, the highest were just 2 8s, and then everything else was a 7.5 or lower. And I did like this book, so don't get me wrong, like these are not low ratings or anything. They're just not particularly high ratings. It's kind of, I don't know, middle of the road for me. I did really enjoy it. As you can see, I rated writing and plot the highest. I just think it was not super thrilling, but it was immersive. I just really enjoyed how it was written. I enjoyed some of the characters a lot. Some of them I wasn't too crazy about. I feel like maybe they could have been fleshed out a little bit more, but I did still really enjoy the characters overall, I would say. I think some of the decisions made 0 sense to me. I wanted to throw the book at the wall sometimes. I actually listened to this on audiobook, so I wanted to throw my phone at the wall when I was listening to it. But despite that, I ended up rating this 4 stars overall. I went back and forth on if it should just be 3.5 rounded up to 4 or if it should just be a flat 4, and I did end up just giving it a flat 4, mostly because I really liked the very ending. I think it was nice. I'm not going to spoil anything, and I think if I use any adjectives, I will spoil it. So I'm just going to say nice, and that's it. But I did really enjoy the ending. The smut, as you can see, was a 2 with a question mark because this was really hard for me to rate. There were only a couple of scenes where I don't even know how to explain this. I don't want to spoil anything, but there were just some scenes where characters were behaving inappropriately around or towards other characters. There was definitely a little bit of sexual abuse. Just a little bit. It was not explicit or super extensive. And there were scenes where characters were naked or their clothes were taken off, etc. And so, I don't know. I just put it at a 2 with a question mark. Honestly, this is kind of a weird one to rate for smut, but yeah. Just so you know, it's the 2 question mark with the caveat. I would say overall, I definitely do recommend this book if you are into thrillers, horrors, etc., but only if you are more into that when it's a little bit of a slower pace and when it has like a little bit of a fantastical element to it. I think then you would probably really enjoy this book. The pacing was just a little bit slow for me. That's the only reason why I'm not generally the biggest fan of horror or thriller or mystery, whatever. I feel like it's really, really, really slow, and then it's like hyper speed at the end, and I don't like that. I would prefer if it was kind of more of a steady, gradual build instead of being like flatlined for 90% of the book and then all of a sudden 110%. I'm not the biggest fan of that, and this is definitely how that book felt. It's not the worst that I've ever read in the kind of mystery, thriller, horror genre in terms of this pacing. So I think if you're already in the genre, it's probably not going to be that bad for you, but just letting you know, if you're somebody like me who generally likes to read, I don't know, kind of faster paced adventure books, fantasy, etc., this might feel really slow to you. And I do think it's worth it if you make it to the end, but it's just making it to the end is kind of a little bit hard, maybe. Next up, I have Bespelled. That was the dark paranormal romantasy book. This is a book about witches. I'll put the description on the screen for the first book. I always do that because I don't want to spoil anything by putting the description on the screen for the second book. But if you want to read about the book, pause it as usual, and then you can read the description. But it's about witches, and it's like this lovers across ages, like soulmates, soulbound, like destined to be with each other kind of trope. And so well done. I just love it so much. It is like the sweetest, most romantic kind of plot in a way, but also, as you can see, it's incredibly smutty. Like so smutty. And I did not know that it was this smutty. And honestly, if I would have known that it was this smutty, I'm not sure if I would have started it. However, I did start it. I didn't know. I just kind of went into it blind. And in a way, I'm glad that I did because it's so good. Like, it is so good. If you are okay with smut and you're okay with frequent smut and really explicit smut, then my goodness, you are going to eat this book up. It is so good. It is just like, it's just so good. I just love it so much. I've talked about it so much on my channel, honestly, because this like just took me by surprise. Like, it just was so shocking to me that I love this series so much. And it's incomplete, which is so frustrating. And I have vented about it and talked about it and everything on so many different videos. So if you want to hear more about it, then you can search Bespelled or the first book, which is called Bewitched, on my channel. And then all of the videos in which I have talked about it at all or even briefly mentioned it will come up. And then you can watch those if you want for more information. I'm not going to talk about it too much. I will just say you can see the ratings are incredibly high. I just love it so much. The only thing that is even slightly low in terms of rating is the writing. And that's more just because the second book especially puts such an emphasis on smut. Just it just was too much. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, literally, I cannot even speak about it. Like, it was just, the book described itself as debaucherous. And I think that's a really good description for it. I think if I had to throw together some adjectives for this book, I would say fun, romantic, exciting, action-packed, debaucherous, for sure. That's a big one. Fantastical, and I don't know, just overall a good time. And this is coming from somebody who generally does not really like books about witches. I don't know what it is. I'm just not really the biggest fan. Like, it just doesn't usually grab me, those types of books. But my gosh, this book is just all about witches, but it's so good. I just loved it so much. I would highly recommend it to anybody as long as you're okay with the smut. If you're not okay with the smut, or if you're not sure, maybe don't even start it, because it really is a lot. And I genuinely think if you're even remotely into paranormal romance, if you start reading this book, you're going to love it so much that you're going to want to rip through the entire series. And if you're not sure about the smut, you're going to be in way too deep, way too quick. You're not going to turn back. That's what happened to me. When I realized just how much smut there was going to be and everything, especially in the second book, it like hits you in the face. It's wild. It was like way too late. There's no way I ever could have stopped reading it. Like, I'm so obsessed with the books. In fact, I literally bought them. So I am going to read them again and again and again. And now that I know, like, roughly when the smut is and how many pages it lasts, because it's more than one page, that's for sure, I can kind of just flip through it now. So I think it's a win-win. Anyways, that is Bespelled. Next up are two books that I read. The first two books in the Raven Cycle series. I read The Raven Boys, which is book 1, and then The Dream Thieves, which is book 2. It's by Maggie Stiefvater, and this is the series that is a young adult urban fantasy series. It has like a little bit of romance in it, but it's really not that much. So I would just categorize it as urban fantasy, or just fantasy in general. Again, as always, I'll just put the description for the first book on the screen because I don't want to spoil anything. So pause if you want to read what the first book is about. But it is a really good young adult book. As you can see for both of the books, the writing is a 9. I just really, really like Maggie Stiefvater's writing. I think she does a really good job of fleshing out the characters so incredibly well. They all have such strong, interesting, kooky personalities. And it's just so much fun to read about the characters. Like, every single character in this book is a vibe. And the entire book itself is a vibe. And it's such a fun, cool, interesting vibe. Like, it just is really immersive in that regard. Like, so immersive in that regard. And her writing, it's the best. I just love it so much. I'll put on the screen, just like the whole screen, a collection of my favorite quotes from her so you can see. But she has so many good quotes, like so many good one-liners, so many good similes and metaphors specifically. I just really enjoy her writing. And it definitely does not read like a young adult book at all. Like, this absolutely could be an adult book. Like, if these characters were just not 16 years old, if they were like 26 years old, then I feel like this would just be categorized as an adult book. I feel like the only reason it's categorized as a young adult book is because the characters are in high school. And that's it. But like, it doesn't feel like that sometimes. They feel definitely much older than they are, which sometimes is kind of annoying because the things that they go through and the things that they do, and then when you think they're like 16, 17 years old, like, that's a little ridiculous. And I just feel like it's so unrealistic. But also, I'm not reading this book for realism, and it's a fantasy book, so it doesn't really matter that much. But I'm just throwing it out there. Like, it is crazy. It's chaotic. Like, the plot was probably my biggest gripe with the first book. Like, it's not even a gripe. I rated both of them 4, and I think the second one, I keep going back and forth. I just finished it a couple of days ago. I think I'm officially gonna say 4.5, rounded down to 4. I really liked both of them. They were so good. And so it's like not that much of a gripe, but if I had to have a gripe, then it would be with the first one. I just feel like the pacing was kind of chaotic. It was like all over the place, and the plot in general was all over the place. There'd be like one plot and then another plot, and you jump to another character, and then there'd be this subplot all of a sudden, and then this subplot and this one. And it just was like, I don't know, crazy. And I think she does a really good job of it. Like, my gosh, I have read some books where they try to do that and it's not good, and it's like you're not getting any information and it's not a good time. This is not that. This is a very good example of that. However, I don't know what it is. For me, it just felt like it was more than I would have wanted, at least in the first book, I guess. Like, I just feel like I didn't get as connected as I wanted to the plot. I felt connected to the characters, but I don't know, in a way it felt more like it was a character-driven book to me, even though it definitely was not, just because I like the characters so much more than I like the plot and the pacing. I don't know if it was just the time in my life. Like, I was very sick. I read this at the very beginning of the month before I really got sick, but I still was definitely feeling it. And so I'm not sure if that led to it, and I had like brain fog and I just wasn't getting it. I'm not really sure what it was. But again, it really was not like a big gripe or a big issue. It just was that it felt a little bit too chaotic sometimes, and like a little bit too jumping around and not really fleshing things out. Like, it felt like it was 99% preparing for the end and then 1% actually having the end. And it felt a little abrupt to me. And I wish that the end was a little bit more fleshed out and a little bit longer, but I still liked it regardless. And I think the second one did a better job, probably because the first book already laid out the foundation. And so you already had everything from the first book going into it. And then the characters were fleshed out even more. The plot was fleshed out even more. Like, it just went so hard in the second book. And I think it was set up to do so. And so I think it was really successful. Whereas the first one for me, I don't know. It just took me a while to get into it, and it felt really slow at first, and then like all of a sudden things started happening and we were jumping around a lot, and then all of a sudden in the final like chapter, that was it. It was over. In the second one, it was a little bit more spread out, I feel like. And the atmosphere also, I rated a bit higher on the second one because I just really liked the whole dream world. I'm not going to spoil anything, so I really can't say anything else, but I just really liked that, and I think it was really fun. And I think as far as a young adult fantasy book goes, this is probably one of the best. Like, this is a very solid choice if you're interested in young adult books in general, especially young adult fantasy specifically. This is a good one. And then, as you can see, of course, there's no smut. They're like all in high school. They're like 16, 17. They're squeaky clean. They're super wholesome. So this is a totally 100%, so far at least, clean, smut-free book. I mean, like, they curse sometimes and they definitely talk about things and joke about things. So I'm not saying it's like 100% squeaky clean, but I mean, my gosh, it's pretty darn squeaky clean. And then the final two books that I read, as you can see, I'm not really going to rate them because these were the rereads. And it's Daughter of the Pirate King and Daughter of the Siren Queen. That's book 1 and book 2 in the Daughter of the Pirate King series. As you can see, I rated both of them 4 stars. And one of the reasons why I'm not giving a caw pile rating for these books is because I just feel like it would be unfair and not very accurate, because this is not my first time reading it, and so there's like that whole film of nostalgia over every single thing I'm thinking and feeling about these books. I first read them like 2 years ago or something, give or take, and so getting back into that world and remembering all the things that I forgot, and just pirate books in general, I'm just like such a big fan of. I cannot get enough of pirate books. I just love them so much. And so I feel like it's a little unfair for me to then put a caw pile rating out. Like, my feelings about this book were definitely heavily influenced by the fact that I had already read it. But I like this series a lot. Is it super well written? No. Is it probably gonna blow anyone out of the water? No. However, if you like pirate books, you might like this one. You probably will, especially if your standards are a little bit lower. I have pretty low standards for pirate books just because I feel like there are not even remotely enough of them. And so I will read anything that involves a pirate. Like, I literally do not care. Even if it's an awful book and I hate it, I'm still going to read it until the end, which I wouldn't really do with any other genre, just because I want pirate books so bad. I just want more. I wish that there were like 1,000 more on the market. And so if you're in the same boat as me, you're probably gonna like it. If you are not in that boat, I honestly don't know if this would be a good choice for you. I think if you're into super young sounding romantasy books, then you might like this one, even if you're not in the same boat as me, as I mentioned before, because this, as I mentioned before in this video, it's categorized as young adult, but I don't really think, especially the second one, should be categorized as young adult. It definitely deals with quite a few adult topics, and I rated it 1.5 on the smut-o-meter because I just wasn't really sure what to do with it. Like this one and also Mexican Gothic were really hard to rate for the smut for some reason. There's no actual smut, but it's not for lack of trying. Like, I will just say that. Like, they certainly were trying hard multiple times to get to the point of where there would be smut, but they were interrupted every single time. And so it's like not 100% squeaky clean, and it's not like just behind closed doors. Like, there definitely are some things that are talked about and said and done, but it's also not like a 2 where there was actual smut. And so I just did a 1.5. I don't know. If you don't like smut, honestly, this book is totally fine for you. I don't think you're going to have an issue with it. Like, it's really not that bad. It's almost squeaky clean, but it's just not 100% squeaky clean. It's not 100% behind closed doors, hence why it's 1.5, but it is like not an issue. So don't worry about it. If you do like smut though, on the other hand, you're probably not going to like this because this book is going to feel too clean for you, I think. But I just don't think that it should be qualified as a young adult book. I don't know, but it definitely reads though, writing wise, like a young adult book. That's the thing. I feel like the plot and the topics and everything definitely should be more adult, new adult, whatever, but the writing is very, very, very young. It's very cheesy, cliched, like it's just very typical of like those kind of cheesy, romantic, young adult kinds of books. And Tricia Levenseller in general, I'm not the biggest fan of her. I really, really, really like so hardcore dislike some of her books, especially Shadows Between Us. I have such a gripe against that book to this day. However, it's beside the point. I'm just not the biggest fan of her writing. I think she writes very, very, very young, very, very, very cheesy. Yeah. Not the biggest fan of her writing. That's all I'm going to say about that. So you just have to know going into it, these little caveats, like the cons to it. And if you think that it's okay, then I think you probably would like it, because despite all of these cons, I think that the plot overall is pretty interesting. And I think that the romance between the main male protagonist and the female protagonist, so the FMC and the MMC, I think that it's really good. I think that it's done well. I think that it's super cheesy. However, I do like the dynamic between them. And I do think that it's a sweet romance. And I really absolutely 100% was rooting for them through the entire 2 books. And so despite all of the cons, there are some good pros if you think you're the type of person who can overlook the cons. If not, if you're even unsure about it, I would not recommend this book to you. I just don't really think that you would like it. I think that there are some hefty cons to deal with, and if you're unsure, it's probably going to be too much and you're probably going to dislike it. But it is fun. It's just like a fun, easy, quick, cheesy read. Like, my gosh, it is so quick. It's like 300 pages or whatever, but it reads like it's 100. Like, it is so quick. And so it's just fun for like just a little thing, you know, to throw in your reading, like in between more hefty books or whatever. Like, that's what I did. I was sick. I just, like, my brain was not functioning properly, and so I was like, what can I possibly read? And then I thought, I'll just read these, and actually the first book was one of my prompt pulls for December, and I read it in November already. So I just knocked it out of the way. Like, I literally pulled the prompt and was like, oh, I'll read this book, Daughter of the Pirate King. And then I think it was later that day, I just really was not feeling good, and I was sitting on the couch, and I was like, what should I read now? Why don't I read that one? Because it's so easy. I've already read it before. It was one of my prom pulls, etc., etc. So it was exactly what I needed at that moment. If you're in a similar situation, it might be exactly what you need too. Anyways, that is everything. Those are all 6 of the books that I read this month. If you have any questions or anything, let me know in the comments below. And if you've read any of these books, please let me know what you thought about them in the comments below. I am super happy to always hear from you and hear your thoughts about everything. And I hope that you had an amazing month of reading in November, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.